Hello, everybody. Next up, we've got Marius, who's going to be introducing you to TM1Py. Those of you that don't know Marius already, he can be described as the Manny Perez of TM1Py. So if you're watching this, you're in the right session to know a little bit more about TM1Py. Over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Marius. I'm presenting from Germany. So in this presentation, I want to answer what TM1Py is, what problems it attempts to solve, and how everyone can benefit from that. I also prepared a couple of high-level demos. It is not a technical deep dive, and we wouldn't look into any particular application of TM1Py in depth. However, if you are interested in TM1Py deep dives, there's a couple of intense TM1Py sessions today that I can recommend. This one is probably aimed for beginners to get an understanding of the bigger picture and how things tie together. Before we get started, please make sure you watch this presentation in full screen mode, because I will be showing code later, and it would be really hard to read in this tiny little window. All right, so I tried to structure this presentation along some questions that people typically ask if they hear about TM1Py. So what is TM1Py? Unfortunately, the answer from a user perspective is it depends. And let me show you what I mean. It depends on your perspective, because every user perceives TM1Py as an instrument to solve their specific problem. Like there's this green guy here who sees it as a pipeline that he can use to build data pipelines. And then there's other people who say, oh, TM1Py, we use that for data science. And other people, they use it for automation. And I think this is okay. Like in a way, they're all kind of right about TM1Py, because TM1Py is just an enabler in a way. It enables people to do valuable stuff with TM1 and Python. And that's what it is. Okay, let's make this more concrete. So what problem do people solve with it? It enables you to do what exactly? Let me try to answer that question. And again, it depends a bit on who you are and what you do with TM1. So I think you could probably categorize the benefactors, the beneficiaries of TM1Py into 4 groups: the power users, developers, kind of like IT architects, and people who do admin and DevOps stuff. And then I think if you zoom out, I think we can categorize the TM1Py use cases into 3 groups. Anything related to connectivity, data integration, data exchange, anything related to automation, meaning stuff that you would do manually, you can now automate, and expressing business logic. And so let me give you a couple of ideas how different user groups can benefit. So for instance, if you're a power user, an advanced user, you can benefit from the connectivity aspect in the sense that it allows you to do custom integration with other tools, like for instance, Power BI. If you're a developer, you can benefit from the connectivity aspect by writing your own new data integration scripts. For instance, to connect cloud tools to TM1, such as Salesforce and Google Sheets. We've seen an example of that today, and we will see more. If you're the kind of architect guy who has a high-level view on data flows, you can make more efficient data integration with TM1Py, eliminate middle layers, and I think a really interesting use case is to use workflow orchestration tools for TM1 with TM1Py. And we show an example of that later today. We will be using Airflow, which is a workflow orchestration tools to orchestrate your data loads from Salesforce, SQL, to automate extracts of TM1 into Google Sheets. It's a very interesting thing from if you're zooming out a bit. Essentially, we're going beyond TI, and we're going beyond chore scheduling here. So this is all possible, and is also you will see this during the demos. It is all possible with reasonable complexity, right? Because the REST API allows us to essentially build anything we want. But then we have to be able to manage and maintain it and own it. And TM1Py sort of closes that gap. It makes it very accessible and limits the complexity. Now, and on the automation side, power users can use TM1Py to generate custom exports like XLSX, CSV, or to build plots and generate them. Developers can benefit from the automation aspect by scripting TM1 in new ways. And for instance, I mean that you will be able to write scripts that are multi-instance. So contrary to Turbo Integrator, TM1Py does not run within the scope of one instance. It is by default multi-instance. So you can connect to one instance, two or three, and that gives you new ways to script and automate. We've seen an example of that earlier today, how, for instance, to keep dimensions in sync in production, if you have a kind of like a master instance and multiple satellites, you could script with TM1Py and Python in new ways. Okay, and also automation from a developer perspective, you can benefit from access to objects which were out of reach in the past. For instance, with TM1Py, you're allowed to control private objects, you're allowed to control chores, you're allowed to control applications that live within the TM1 server. So you have a whole new way to control. You control the commit situation of your operations, which you couldn't really do in Turbo Integrator, and essentially it just gives you new ways to control and automate, and allows you to boost efficiencies in your team and in your environment. And obviously, anyone who's in a DevOps team, they benefit from automating tests, automated tests, regression tests, sanity tests. You can write security scripts that apply on multiple instances, especially if you're running more than one TM1 instance. DevOps team can benefit from automation with TM1Py. Okay, and then there's the business logic aspect. So power users can use TM1Py to tap into data science. You can generate forecasts with some of the best predictive libraries in the world that are available for Python. And well, you can analyze your data using Jupyter notebooks in new interactive ways with code. And developers can obviously benefit from expressing business logic in TM1Py. Well, I still think Turbo Integrator should be our default approach, but then some things are just hard to do in Turbo Integrator. I'm thinking of string parsing, date and time functions. I'm thinking of more calculated functions, like more difficult to calculate mathematical functions like internal rate of return, net present value. These kind of things are really easy to do in Python, are somewhat difficult in Turbo Integrator. So perhaps some of the business logic we could do with TM1Py as well. And now, before we jump to the demo, you probably noticed that the most important group is missing on this table, which is the end users. And I left them out because ultimately I think the end users, they benefit from everything that makes TM1 better or faster or more robust. Alrighty, let's move on to the demo part now. So you should be seeing Arc here, and this is essentially just a cube view with some data. We're seeing some actual sales numbers from 2021 over different business units, products, and you see that we have the customer dimension on the columns. And now let's imagine a business user wants to use Jupyter Notebook to play around with the data, maybe create a plot, calculate some statistics, and do an Excel export. And you can do all that with TM1Py. And in fact, please note how easy this is in terms of lines of code. So to establish a connection to TM1 and retrieve the data from an existing cube view, you just have to write 4 lines of code. And then the data is available at your hands in Python. And you can use, like I said, there's some of the best analytical libraries and functions are available for Python. And you have them now at your fingertips. And now I'm gonna keep this very high level. I'm just gonna touch the surface really of what's possible. But here in this code, we're gonna look at a couple of key customers. We're looking at 4 customers, and just slicing our data frame here in Jupyter. And now we have it sliced. We can aggregate. So how many sales did we have on these customers in total, and visualize that as a bar plot. And then we want to calculate some statistical measures on this customers. So here you can see how many orders did these customers do in total. What is the mean order, the mean purchase order? What's the standard deviation, the minimum, the maximum order, and quantiles. Well, I just wanted to show how easy this is. That may not be very relevant from an analytical perspective, but generating these kind of things is incredibly simple with Python. And of course, you can always export your table or your data frame into Excel, into CSV, into HTML, into SQL. We've seen a use case earlier today where my colleague was working with data frames, and then he didn't. I just called the function to Excel, which produced this file, which is coming from just now. I'm not going to open it because Excel is always a bit slow with zoom on. But essentially, you could also write it to a SQL table, and then you just write to_SQL. So it's really powerful stuff. Let's move on to the next demo. So this was probably the use case of analytics, playing with data, and now comes the automation kind of thing, or the development. This is the use case for a developer that wants to develop logic in a multi-instance environment. So here we have the following situation, that you have a dimension plan business unit that exists in 2 instances, but then one instance is the master. So you see here on the left in the planning sample model, we have got a different version of this dimension. Germany and Canada exist in planning sample. They do not yet exist in the sales model, which I guess you can sort of see as a satellite to this master instance. And so now I'm going to execute these 5 lines of code. And what you see here is that we're connecting to both instances. We're calling one TM1 source, the other one's called TM1 target. And then we're fetching the dimension, and we're calling the update or create method. So if it doesn't exist, it'll be created. If it does exist, it'll be overwritten by the latest version. So it executed, and now we should see that the dimension is in sync. So it's really, it's like 5 lines of code. And so you see that the elements were added to the dimension, and also they're integrated into the consolidations. But you probably noticed that the attributes are missing. And why is that? Because attribute values are considered well, facts or cell level data. So this is just how the TM1 REST API works, and TM1Py sort of just follows along. So if you know this, you have to write a little bit more than 5 lines of code to bring over the attribute values as well. So here you see a little MDX query that fetches data from the element attributes cube and prints it out. So now you see this is, again, we're fetching the data as a data frame because it's convenient in Python. A little table or data frame here with the element, the attribute, and the value. And then we send it through. Again, that's just 2 lines. And once that executes, we should see the alias and all the attributes. So this is mission accomplished. Dimensions are back in sync. And of course, like, I execute this manually, but you could also schedule it. You could parameterize it, run it overnight. We've seen a more sophisticated version of that like 1 or 2 hours ago by my friend Radu, who made this much more sophisticated, and it can absolutely be used in production. And so there's one more sample that I prepared to illustrate the capabilities around data integration. And So this is about integrating data from a tool, any tool that has an API. Because I wanted to keep this demo really simple, I used a public data set that is available on the internet. But earlier today, I showed how you can integrate data from Salesforce, how you can push data to Google Sheets. So of course, the opportunities, there are more possibilities. I'm just keeping it very simple so that the code is easy to understand. So this data set is published by the government of Australia. They published a little CSV file that you can access through the browser or from Python. It's really straightforward. It's a little CSV data set with the public holiday by jurisdiction in Australia. And now let me show you how we can integrate that into a cube. And maybe let's first look at the cube. So here we have the cube with the date, the jurisdiction, and the measure dimension. It's currently empty. And now I'm just gonna run the full script at once and walk you through it while it executes. So we have to import a couple of libraries. Here, these 3 lines, they're fetching the data from the API. Then we're printing out the first 3 lines, just to give you an idea what the data looks like. And this is, of course, the same data that we saw in the browser earlier. And then comes Python. Python has to transform this into a mapping of intersection and values, because this is what the raw data in TM1 ultimately is, right? It's a mapping of intersections, of tuples, and values. So this is a little bit of Python code to transform the CSV into this structure. And once we have this structure, we can call this function, which is a TM1Py function, to write it into the cube, which it was already executed. And now looking back at the cube, we can see the public holiday by jurisdiction. And of course, you could do this with any data that's publicly available on the internet, like exchange rates, weather, etc. Or you could do this from APIs that are in the cloud or on premise in your organization. Okay, let me jump back to the presentation. All right, so so how does it look? I think this question is answered. Let's continue. We still have 4 or 5 questions to go. What is the relation between TM1Py and the TM1 REST API? So from a technical perspective, TM1Py is a wrapper around the TM1 REST API, and they both allow you to interact with TM1 programmatically, but I think they have different purposes. Like the REST API, it tries to be an OData compliant REST API for TM1 that can be used from any language. So we've seen examples of that earlier today when Uber showed a Google Sheet plugin that they built. They also use the REST API, and they can use the REST API because the REST API is so flexible and you can use it from any language. TM1Py is not that. TM1Py tries to make it easy and efficient to interact with TM1 specifically from Python. So whenever you can use Python, it makes sense to use TM1Py because it just makes your life a lot easier. And this is the point I wanted to show earlier with the examples that you write scripts of like 10, 15 lines of code. And this is all possible because of TM1Py. So TM1Py is always about 2 things, Python and simplicity. And in a way, TM1Py is like an easy to use version of the REST API. And let me show that visually perhaps. So if this is TM1 and this is you trying to solve any of the 3 problems that we have seen earlier, if TM1Py did not exist, what would you have to do? So you would have to manage the access to TM1, like meaning the different authentication modes, CAM, Kerberos, basic. You would have to authenticate. Then you would have to send requests, meaning you sending messages to the TM1 server on an HTTP level. and whatever you get back from TM1, it has to be transformed into those little data frames that we saw, or into objects in Python. And this is all, you sort of need to do that. And then comes the green part. This is, I called this analysis, but this is really anything that you want to do. This is the problem you want to solve, right? Whether you want to integrate data, you want to do some analysis in Jupyter, or this is really the task that you set out to do. And the yellow box, this is just stuff that you have to do in order to do the green part that you want to do. And so this is the idea of TM1Py, that we put this together, open source it, and make it a collective effort, so that because we all share this piece of code. And it doesn't matter if someone is doing a data integration project or a predictive forecasting project with TM1Py. We have this shared component, and it makes total sense to have this open source and make this a collective effort. And this is what TM1Py is all about. And it so maybe to quantify that, we've seen now as of October 2021, we've seen contributions from 25 people, which I think is quite huge in TM1, which isn't really an open. There isn't much of an open source spirit yet, but it seems to be recognized that it makes sense to share these three components and put them into TM1Py. All right, TI rules or TM1Py? I think that's a question that will pop up eventually if you do embrace TM1Py in your organization. You say, now we install it, and we can solve certain problems with it. And then when sometimes you have new requirements on your TM1 model in the team, you will ask the question, so do we use TI rules or TM1Py? And let me show that visually as well. I think in the past, when we built new features in TM1, we pretty much had two options for development: rules or Turbo Integrator. And now with TM1Py, we kind of think of TM1Py as the third pillar for scripting in TM1. And TI rules and TM1Py, they are mostly complementary tools. And while this is certainly true for rules and TI, it is also true for rules and TM1Py. It is mostly true for TM1Py and TI. Like, let me give an example. The kind of data integration or multi-instance scripts that we have seen, you could only do that with TM1Py. And obviously, if you're moving data from one cube to another cube within a TM1 instance, it only makes sense to use Turbo Integrator. It wouldn't make too much sense to use TM1Py. But then when it comes to expressing business logic or doing some transformations, you see there can be a little bit of an overlap. So there will be situations where you could say, oh, we could use Turbo Integrator for that, or TM1Py. And I think that's a good thing. It's good to have these discussions in the team, because they both have their unique strengths. And if you're interested in this topic, there's a presentation happening later today by Michael that he will provide a couple of stats on performance and a couple of facts on to help you make this decision. And also there will be a panel discussion on the same topic. So this is hopefully interesting for you. And now that brings me to my last slide. Why did we decide to build TM1Py? Why didn't we build TM1 Java or TM1 PowerShell or TM1 Perl, perhaps? And so I think Python is a well-designed language. It's efficient, it's very elegant. I think it's very readable and has a lot of good features, and you can do almost anything you want with it. But the thing is, this is just my opinion, right? I mean, you find people who say PowerShell is elegant. And I think the killer argument for Python is the ecosystem. So Python is second to none in terms of libraries and packages that are available. And that makes Python such a good complement to TM1, because it was always about extending TM1 and like bringing new features in. And you can also quantify that, actually. So this is the Python package index. This is where people host and share their packages for Python. And you see that right now there's more than 300,000 packages, and TM1Py is just one of those packages. And actually, this usefulness of Python, I think it also explains its rise in popularity. And just 1 or 2 weeks ago, I saw this headline. Python just became the most popular language according to TOB, which is a very serious index. And what that means is that this organization TOB, it tries to find out what is the most popular language, and it tries to understand that based on the number of engineers that exist who know that language. And Python just seemed to be the most popular in this month, this year. And yes, and this index, the idea of this index is to help companies make strategic decisions on which programming language to adopt when building new systems. So I think that's my presentation. That's all I wanted to share. Are there any questions?
Hi, Marius. We've got one question. Could you tell us why you decided to make this open source? Explain why.
Oh yes, I think it could only succeed as an open source project, because the level of contribution and feedback and acceptance it receives from the community, it just wouldn't get it if it was closed source. If we would use it here and there, like the level of let's call it success that it has received so far, it was only possible as an open source system. And also, like, some of the most important features, they weren't developed by us. Like, for instance, the Kerberos login. I didn't build this. Someone else did. And this is not the only feature that came from the community. So it makes sense to do this as an open source project.
Okay, great. We have one other question from, and excuse me, apologies if I pronounced your name incorrectly, but Julianne is asking, can you connect using CAM mode 5 with SSO?
Oh, yes, you can. If you Google TM1Py authentication, it'll bring you to a help page where you find a sample.
Okay, great. So just a couple of extra bits. Could you please do your feedback on this, because we'd love to hear back from you guys. Like Marius said, there's a couple more TM1Py sessions later on this afternoon. Marius himself is doing, I think, 4 others later on, and there's also the TM1Py versus TI session in about an hour and a half. A panel discussion. So I encourage you to join all of those too. I guess we've got 2 minutes left. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Marius?
No.
Oh, okay.
I do have something.
Okay.
In 3 hours, I'm going to present a very interesting tool called Airflow that works really well with TM1 and Python, and allows you to build data pipelines. I think it's awesome, and I'd recommend everyone to join.
Great. Thank you for that, Marius, and look forward to your next presentations.
Cool.
Thank you.